Hi, well, it's Dr. Stephen Masley, and I have some special guests with me today, and a really, I think, an excellent topic that we all want to hear about. So, up here we have Dr. David Perlmutter and Dr. Austin Perlmutter, authors of a new book, which I've just read and really enjoyed, The Brainwash, by these two illustrious authors. And hey, welcome.
We're delighted to be here. Thank you for having us.
Oh, I really appreciate you guys taking the time. And to me, this is special. You know, I don't really know of that many father-son books out there. So could you kind of tell us how this came to be? I think it's really cool.
Go ahead, Oz.
Sure. Well, as you know, my dad has written books before this. This is very much my first book. And I was finishing my internal medicine residency up in Oregon. And I was looking at what's going wrong with patients with chronic diseases. And I was kind of spinning my wheels because in the clinic, I was seeing people with diabetes, with hypertension, with heart disease. I was telling them, ideally, when they had the pre-versions of those conditions, so pre-hypertension, pre-diabetes, maybe some concern for heart disease, what they needed to do to prevent those conditions. And it's, stuff we all kind of know about. It's eating healthier. It's not eating all of these refined carbohydrates and all the junk you find in stores, and exercising a little bit. And I tell the patient said, yeah, that sounds good. And they wouldn't do it. And so I talked to my dad about this, and we puzzled over this concept. Why is it that we tell people what is good for them? They say, I understand what is good for me. And yet they still aren't able to reach that conclusion of being able to follow through on what they know is going to bring them health and really happiness and satisfaction in life. And something we started to realize is that, it's our decision-making ability. It's the ability to follow through on making good decisions that has been compromised by our modern lives. And specifically, we're looking at things like inflammation, chronic stress, not getting enough sleep. And we started doing this research, and we realized that this is so foundational, that these are the things that are changing our brains so that we can't make good decisions. And I think both of us were so excited because we came at this from this multi-generation perspective. And he's obviously seen tons more patients than I have over the course of his life, but I'm seeing this, as is he, beyond any sort of individual patient encounter and more of a general paradigm problem with the way that we are engaging with the modern world, and how then, yes, some of those consequences are those health outcomes that we care about so much, but really it's just our ability to experience life to its fullest that is being lost.
So, to amplify what Austin said, and I'm sure you as well, experienced this frustration in learning everything you possibly can, conveying that information to the patient, and nothing happens.
Yes.
And that's
I've had that.
What's never been addressed. That the learning part we address, the skills at transmitting the information we've addressed, we work on it as best we can. But it's the follow through that is the breakdown. It's the decision making on the part of that patient. And the truth of the matter is they know what they should be doing.
Yes.
And they've read the books. They've seen Dr. Masley's public television programs. They know what to do, but they don't do it. And, for Austin and me, I think the first revelation was when we realized how our decision-making process has been hacked, that we've been blaming people for a long time. And we've been saying, well, why in the heck don't you just do this and lose weight and exercise for 45 minutes a day? And it's not fair because our work in writing Brainwash led us to the discovery that our basic decision-making ability has been hacked, has been co-opted by so much that goes on around us,
right,
whereby now we are only making impulsive moment-to-moment decisions that don't allow us to think about the future consequences. And the decisions that people need to make as it relates to their health have to think about things are going to be like tomorrow, next week, next year. And, this is decision making for financial decisions, for decisions with respect to relationships, et cetera. So it's a very big issue that we've confronted. And we recognize that these long-term, well thought out decisions are a manifestation of the functionality of a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. And that exercises control over the more impulsive, short-sighted decision-making parts of the brain. And we coined a term in the book called disconnection syndrome,
Yes.
whereby when we disconnect that prefrontal cortex from those lower centers of the brain, then we act from those lower centers and we make impulsive decisions to eat the wrong food, stay up too late at night, to be overly involved in our computers and act in an addictive fashion when it comes to our online shopping activities, you name it. So what began as just looking at decision making really took us to a place of understanding how people become uh, more self-centered and less empathetic, for example. That's also
Yes.
what is being threatened by what we're talking about, disconnection syndrome.
So, how does diet influence this decision-making project? And how can we use that to help our prefrontal cortex?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. And as you well know, there are a lot of diets out there, some better than others, but many of them share these fundamental ideas, being that we shouldn't be eating so much of these ultra processed foods that you find in stores, specifically if you go into those center aisles. And again, a lot of us know these things about certain foods are not so good for us. No one's out there saying you need more donuts. I mean, maybe there are some people out there, but they're not proclaiming the health.
Krispy Kreme is probably saying that.
And those are treats, and that's okay. But the bottom line is this: what we are talking about in our book is that if you want to stick to any of these diets, and Mediterranean diet being a great example, that's a wonderful diet. But if you want to follow through on being somebody who eats that food, you've got to make that initial step to be able to decide to stick to that diet. And you've got to be able to stay on that diet. And so, what we're talking about here is getting a little bit upstream of that and trying to set your brain up for good dietary decisions. Now, the fascinating part of this whole thing is to ask what happens if we don't eat those healthy foods? And what happens is we create inflammation in our bodies. And again, this is probably something that most viewers, most listeners have already heard about before. Inflammation, specifically chronic inflammation, it's not good for us. It's linked to basically all of the diseases that we care about:
Right.
heart disease, dementia. But what we've uncovered and what research has shown us literally in the last few years is that inflammation changes our thinking in the short term. So one thing to say, inflammation will increase your risk for developing dementia 20, 30 years down the line. Another thing to say, that if you create inflammation in the body, that's going to change your decisions today. And as you might expect, it changes them in a negative way.
Yes.
When researchers induce inflammation in the body, that causes people to be more short-sighted. So let's think about what that means. If you're eating food that creates inflammation in your body, you're going to be more short-sighted. And when you're more short-sighted, you're going to make poor decisions. Those poor decisions include eating those foods that create inflammation. So we're talking about this trap, this cycle, this vicious cycle in which people will eat foods that are bad for them, which then lead to inflammation, lead to more poor decisions, and lead to eating more of those foods that are bad for them.
And to amplify this a bit, I think it's important. And what we did in the first part of the book is we called out the fact that industry is making foods more addictive. That
Yeah.
68% of the 1.2 million foods sold in America's grocery stores have added sweetener. And that makes us, ultimately through, as Austin mentioned, the mechanism of inflammation makes our decision making more short-sighted. What do? We go right back and buy more of whatever food was sweet, because that is a hack into our natural desire for sweet. Anyone that you talk to will indicate that they have a sweet tooth. It's a survival mechanism. It told our ancestors safe, uh, ripe, and
Mhm.
helped us make body fat, which was a great thing for times of caloric scarcity. But that said, look what the food industry has done by hacking in to our desire for sweet. And as Austin said, this is a terrible pun, but it's a feed forward cycle. The more you eat those crappy foods, the more you'll eat those crappy foods, because you
Yes.
become more and more impulsive in your decision making, especially as it relates to food. You can get there by not having a good night's sleep. That very next day, your decision making is more impulsive. If you chronically don't get restorative sleep, research demonstrates that you may consume as much as 380 more calories each day without a similar increase in energy burn. So your net positive 380 calories a day, in the face of 3,500 calories equals 1 pound of body fat, you can see pretty quickly how impulsivity leads to weight gain, which further compromises sleep. And once again, you have activated yet another of these damaging feed forward cycles. And what we provide towards the latter parts of Brainwash are ways of getting our off ramps, basically, how we can regain the ability to make better decisions, how we can reconnect, how we can offset this disconnection syndrome, bringing the adult back into the room, re-engaging prefrontal cortex control over more impulsive activity, and really set us back on firm ground in terms of our decision making. And when you look around, you perhaps more than most, having written what you've written, and you see what's happening globally to, for example, the diet. I mean, you just got back from the Mediterranean and you saw how the Western diet is becoming pervasive even around the Mediterranean. How
Yeah,
the
especially
implications.
in the youths of today's
Yeah, we've
young
talked about
children.
the implications many times in terms of, as Austin mentioned, chronic degenerative conditions, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's. But now to consider the globalizing effects on our decision making of this Western diet, the pro inflammatory diet, changing decision making, helping to foster an us versus them mentality around the world, this then becomes a very important discussion indeed.
Now, in your book, Brainwash, you both talk about nature and how being exposed to nature how does being exposed to nature impact those parts of our prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, those areas? How does that connect, and how is that part of the solution here?
Sure. Well, it's a great question, and something that's been really interesting in the research in the last, I guess, maybe about 30 or so years is this idea that we can gain health benefits from being in nature. And you might say, okay, I knew that nature was good for me, but I think it's important to look at why is it good for us? Because it's one thing to say, I want to step outside and look at some trees. It's another thing to say that's maybe a necessary intervention to improve your quality of life. And so in Brainwash, we talk about some of the more general things. For example, people exposed to more nature seem to do better when it comes to their general physical health, when it comes to their general mental health. But as it relates to decision making, it really comes down to a couple of things. When you're in nature, you're lowering levels of inflammation in your body. When you're in nature, you're lowering levels of stress. And those are two things that take your prefrontal cortex offline. So the goal would be to say, how can I use nature as an intervention? Yeah, you're going to feel better. You're going to be a happier person, perhaps, but you're also using that to facilitate these pathways in the prefrontal cortex that are going to enable you to make good decisions. Like, for example, going back out into nature.
Basically, bringing the adult back into the room.
Mm-hmm.
And, the science is pretty darn profound, most of it being done in Japan. But, research that looks at impulsivity. There are various ways that psychologists can test impulsivity just based on showing somebody an image, a picture of an urban environment or nature. Dramatic differences in terms of impulsivity, and even looking at inflammatory markers, as Austin mentioned, and cortisol levels in people who are exposed to nature. And to be clear, it doesn't mean you have to climb a mountain in a national park every day. Even getting outside where there are trees, even a plant in your office, kitchen, bedroom, you name it, or even a photograph of nature has been demonstrated to have positive effects. It's what we're looking for as one piece of a program to help you reconnect, to help you offset this disconnection syndrome that we talk about, helping you reconnect not only to yourself and your decision making, but reconnect to others and reconnect even to having some conscious awareness of the health of the planet.
Yeah. And so just to kind of parrot that, the idea is that you have almost this teeter-totter. And on the one hand, you start off in this place where you're making poor decisions, you have poor health, you're maybe an unhappy person. We know that inflammation may actually cause depression. So all these things are linked. And our goal is to say, first of all, you need to recognize what is keeping you here, what's locking you into this pathological state. And then to say, what are the things you can start stacking on the other end so that you alter the balance? And nature is one of those things. We talk about several other things in the book, things like sleep and meditation. But the goal is once you start to move that teeter-totter a bit to the point where all of a sudden your brain says, oh, wait a second, I can make good decisions. That's going to be a feed-forward cycle. And now you're going to become a person who is more consistently making healthy, good decisions, making it more likely that you stay in that place and, in essence, maintain a life of making good decisions.
You know, we talked earlier about how the changes in the foods we consume are hacking into our brains. And I think there's no more obvious evidence of hacking into our brains than what we are exposed to in our digital worlds. You know, what happens on our screens to take us away from what we're interested in and harvest our attention for monetary gain. And we all know that's happening. We're not calling out something here that no one has heard about these days, but we know, how our attention is so manipulated and how such profound efforts are made to captivate us, and they're very, very successful at that. And we're not anti-technology, anti-digital technology in any way. I mean, look at what we're doing right now. We're having a wonderful conversation via this great platform. But I think it's clear that technology can get away from us. Christian Lang in 1921 said that technology is a useful servant, but a dangerous master. And that was back in 1921. And I think those words ring true today. We love our digital technology. It makes life pretty easy, but we certainly know that we can be manipulated by that, and that locks us in further to more impulsivity, more self-centeredness, which is what we really are hoping to get people away from and make better decisions. We provide this book, Brainwash, as the bridge between information and action. You know what you want to do, but you just can't make it happen. And we talked about blame earlier. For us as physicians, thinking, well, the patient should be doing something. Why in the heck don't they? But even the self-blame of people who want to do, want to accomplish certain goals or make dietary changes, whatever it may be, and constantly playing that game of self-blame without realizing how much the deck is stacked against each and every one of us each and every day.
In your book, Brainwash, you've got like 5 steps that people can take to. Can you give us a brief introduction to those, to get a head start on what can we do to get back so we're connected with our prefrontal cortex, we have control over our mood, our emotions, and it makes it easier for us to be healthy and happy and active.
Yeah,
I'll pick it up.
Well, I mean, I kind of go back and forth between what is maybe the single best thing that a person could do if they want to start reclaiming those good decisions. And in the book, we have a 10-day plan where we lay this out over the course of 10 days to allow the reader to go from wherever they are to being able to see what it's like to have all those interventions online and to be able to start making those good decisions. I guess if I had to pick what I would tell a person to do who wanted to start ground up, do something they saw an immediate result from, it'd be sleep.
I would totally agree with you.
And the reason I say this isn't because it is necessarily the only thing that does this, but because when you look at the research, you see that after one night of not getting a good sleep, your prefrontal cortex kind of goes offline. Your memory, your focus, your ability to regulate your emotions, your ability to, as my dad said, regulate your dietary intake of calories, it's all kind of gone. And that's just one night of sleep deficit. So these other types of things we recommend, for example, meditation. You might get a substantial benefit from doing 5, 10, 12 minutes of meditation, but the sleep thing is going to be the entire day. I don't have to tell you, when you skip a night of sleep, you can't wake up that next morning and you wouldn't wake up. Let's say you skip that night, you get up that next day and imagine that's going to be a good day. Look, it could happen, but it's unlikely. And so it's one thing to say that you feel kind of crummy when you don't get a good night's sleep, but what we talk about in the book is it basically puts your prefrontal cortex offline. You become more impulsive, you become more aggressive, you become more likely to make poor decisions, you become more likely to have trouble managing emotions. That's why if you're out there driving on the highway and somebody cuts you off and you've missed that night of sleep, good luck. Number one, your attention's not going to be there, so you're less likely to react in time. But two is when you do react, you're going to be angry. So the goal is to take things like that, just getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep and building on it such that a person goes from basically the standard state of things, which is not really good, to being able to manage life in a way that is of most benefit to them.
And it's interesting here. The three of us know darn well what it's like to be making life and death decisions for people having been up all night, in our
Yes.
medical residency training. I mean, you have people who are making life and death. You wouldn't do that to a pilot. You wouldn't say, okay, we're going to have you go ahead and fly instruments to from point A to point B, but may as well stay up all night. They have strict rules. And yet for doctors,
Yeah.
where are those rules?
Right.
We've all been through it.
And even in the bigger picture of things, when we're going through all of these components that contribute to good executive functions, meaning the ability to make well-reasoned pros and cons
Mhm.
type decisions, these are the things that are systematically taken away during medical training, which is a strange idea, right? We say, you got to get enough sleep. Fine. That's something you're not going to get in the medical training. You got to eat healthy food. Oh, well, you're kind of on your own. Maybe you bring a granola bar in and have a chance for a snack. You've got to make sure you maintain your relationships with other people. Well, good luck with that. And you've got to be under low conditions of stress to have good thinking. Well, again, this is all kind of counter to the traditional model of it. So that's kind of another subject, but it's an interesting point, which is
Well,
if you
I
want to
definitely
support good
get
decision
sleep's
making,
number one. What do
you
you two
expect you
have
want
for
that in
number
your
two?
medical professionals.
And in spite of all that, we all recovered from that, and
Yes.
hopefully are in a position now where we're making good decisions. And I think that should be empowering for your viewers right now. Is that this can be turned around? Um, we tell this an interesting story in our book about a fellow by the name of Phineas Gage, who in the 1850s had a very quick disconnection syndrome, if you will, when he had a steel rod, iron rod, I guess it was, driven through his brain and cut
Right.
off his prefrontal cortex from the rest of his brain. And he became impulsive and angry and aggressive and all those things. But many people have heard that story, but the part of the story that they might not have heard about that we brought to light is that years later, he became I guess, a stagecoach driver in Chile, and was apparently very affable and had regained his composure. And it's a testament to the brain's ability to rewire itself through neuroplasticity. So, I think that's a very important point for your viewers, that, they may be saying, oh, darn it, I can't make any good decisions. I'm up late, I'm binge buying, I can't help myself on the Amazon Prime, I'm eating crap that, what the heck? Problem is those things keep, feeding into themselves, but you can break that cycle, and it doesn't really matter a lot where your on ramp is to our program. It might be 15 minutes of exercise, getting out in nature. I would agree with Austin. I think that entering into the sleep idea to really get a jump on things is in our society, where, what is it, 40% of adults, is 40 or 48%?
Oh, okay. CDC says 1/3 of adults don't get the
So
necessary.
33
Yeah.
don't get enough restorative sleep. That's, that number of American adults who are impulsive because of it, and anxious, and not making the most ideal decisions the next day. So I would agree. And some people may think they've slept the whole night, and lo and behold, when they have a sleep study, they realize that they're constantly being awakened by having breathing troubles or periodic leg movements. So you really don't know until you study it whether it is to have a formal polysomnogram, or maybe a wearable device to give you some insight as to really what's going on during those number of hours where you think you might be getting good sleep.
Well, this has been great getting to talk to you, and I definitely have enjoyed your book. And one of the things I liked about it were the recipes. You had some surprisingly really good recipes in here. I mean, I only say surprisingly because I haven't really thought about that in the past. But I think this is really for me. These just stood out to me as some things I want to try in my home here in
Well,
my kitchen.
I'm going to recommend Hickman's Law. I've been a sucker for slaw. A sucker for slaw would be a great name for a book. For my entire life, probably because I like the mayonnaise, but whatever. I like cabbage for whatever
Okay.
my heritage. But then if you do it with jicama, then you get all that prebiotic fiber. So I think it's a
Okay.
great recipe.
I like
So
that.
I want to tell you that in thinking about what we hope to accomplish with this book now that it's coming out today, it's really important for people to realize that they've got to stop blaming themselves and recognize what in the heck is going on to hack into their brains, and that this is it's a global event that's changing the way people see the world. When you consider that we've talked for years about how diet influences risk for disease, how it increases inflammation, you name it. But to think about how diet may influence your mood and influence how you see the world around you, is kind of next gen in terms of our nutritional discussions. And, you were really very right in, I guess, Mediterranean diet 2.0, as we've talked about before, in really focusing on inflammation. And it turns out it's more, yes, it's important for the diseases we talked about, but now we're talking about it in terms of food relating to our decision-making process. And that becomes huge. So, it's very exciting to see where we're going to go with this.
Well, I'm really grateful for your book because, I mean, oftentimes I think we unintentionally think of people as lazy or even bad because they aren't making the right decisions. We think well, you should know what to do, right? But I think this book, one, helps identify why people are making bad decisions. They're caught in this inflammatory connection where they can't connect their prefrontal cortex and they're unable to make decisions, but you offer a solution. And I'm really grateful. I want to thank both of you for helping
Let me just say
people.
that you really got it. What you just said, we obviously with the book, we're doing a lot of podcasts, a lot of media, but what you just said really, I think, encapsulates very well what the mission was and
Yes, and
what our
so
goals
I'm
are.
grateful for this solution for people who are trapped that can help them in a big way to make a difference. So thank you for me, and thank you for my listeners. So good luck with the book. It's out today, folks. Today you can order it wherever books are sold. So thank you again for coming. Really appreciate it.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks for having us.
All right.